brain on vinyl. If you're like me, you know that vinyl is more than just a way of listening to music. It's an experience. Whether it's that crackle at the start of a record or the warmth of analog sound, vinyl connects us to the music different. In each episode of Your Brain on Vinyl, Chris and I will be diving into the records that move us, the albums that stir up our memories, and the sounds that make us feel alive. And so if you love vinyl music and that deep emotional connection, you are in the right place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you do not miss any of the fantastic vibes that are coming your way. Let's get into it. This is Your Brain. Yo, what is shaking, everybody? Good to see you. Good to see you. Welcome. It is Monday again. And we are here like clockwork. What's up, Chris?
What's up, Jason? Happy Monday.
Happy Monday, man. Great way to start the week, right?
I never thought those words would come out of my mouth, but here we are the past month and a half. Monday nights have been a good thing.
Yeah, it's like Mondays aren't so bad anymore. So welcome back, everyone. You might have noticed, the astute viewer will have noticed that the name, we got a little bit of a name switch. We are Your Brain on Vinyl now. Just because early on in our vision of this show, we said, man, we don't want to just talk about jazz. We love jazz. It's one of our first loves, but we have a lot of loves too. And so we're going to get into that stuff. And it starts right here, right now. Talking about some of the records that we are most thankful for. We thought, Thanksgiving is coming. It's a great time to kind of get into that, records that we're thankful for. And of course, we want to know what records you guys are thankful for. So use that chat box down below. Let's see. We obviously want your feedback. We want to debate this stuff. We like to. We're going to go through and we're going to pick 10 records between us. And then after each record, we'll set up a little poll and you guys can pick whether you like it, hate it, rate it, or hate it, kind of a thing, like we did over on Service Noise. Don't forget to like and sub if you are watching. Helps the channel out more than you know. And what else? I think I told you everything I need to tell you. Did I miss anything, Chris?
No, I think you pretty much nailed it. I mean, we're looking to create a discussion here. I think we're very appreciative. Everybody tuned in the first 5 or 6 weeks on the jazz series, went through those instrument episodes and participated in the fantasy jazz draft, which was just an awesome time. We're just hoping to explore more topics. Sometimes we might have a series that's multiple episodes. Sometimes it'll be a one-off and just a topic that we feel passionate about. So, like Jason said, like and subscribe to the Spinz Vinyl channel. We're going to have playlists to complement every episode going forward, as promised. I know the jazz ones were a big hit with a lot of people that reached out to me. They're very appreciative of us kind of compiling that. And we're going to do the same for this episode. So you'll have a feature track from each one of the albums that Jason and I choose from this episode and the leftovers episode that will air next Monday, post-holiday, after we get out of the food coma and traveling of the next 4 days or 5 days. So pretty psyched. And tonight's going to be a good one, man. I mean, we debated how we go about this, how we want to talk about some of the records and albums that have been important to us. We see so much on social media about top 10, top 5, 10 records you should own, 10 records that are essential. And we thought we'd put a little bit of a spin on it, talk about the 10 records that we're thankful for a lot of different reasons. So I know Jason and I will reveal some of the criteria that inspired our choices and kind of get into the back history of how this discussion came about. And one milestone album to start that we both passionately agree on and had an equal impact on us, even though Jason and I, a little bit of an age difference and a little bit of an experience difference. I think that
Chris is much older than me, for you that don't know.
I look much older than Jason. But that's the cool thing about the show is we're going to be able to really touch all different points of genres and time. And there is plenty of overlap, and the stuff that we do overlap on, we are in violent agreement about. So I'm looking forward to this show and many others to come.
Yeah, I'm psyched, man. And Chris said it. I mean, it's funny how these things come up, because after the last stream, we got to talking about, just randomly hit on a record that we were both like, oh my God, this is this artist's best record, even though I don't think it's not the, what do you call it? The wisdom or whatever that necessarily people automatically go to this record immediately. But for he and I, we agreed immediately. So Let's jump into it. I think I don't know what he's picking. He doesn't know what I'm picking. And we're just going to have fun with this and just kind of hit on some stuff and talk about, what we're thankful for. And again, you guys feel free to chime in. So Chris, why don't you kick us off today? I'm stoked to see. I know what the first record is because we picked the same one here. It's what inspired this whole thing. So, but go ahead, baby. Let's kick this thing off.
Well, before we do that, I think we should outline our criteria for what inspired our choices.
Okay.
I think that we each have a different set. And, for me, when I'm thinking about why I chose some of these albums, there was some things that had to really reach a benchmark for me. Number one, it's an album that's in my collection, never leaving. Never, ever leaving. It will always be a staple. Number two, it's something that I revisit all the time, pretty frequently, despite, how much music I listen to. It always winds its way back into the rotation. Number three is it kind of catapulted me into another album by an artist, another style of music, another genre. And there is some sentimental value there. I think my parents, aunts, uncles, friends indirectly influenced a lot of the taste I have. So that you see that kind of bleed into my picks. Also, there are a couple of albums where I was there when it started, that band or that artist, and I kind of been able to follow them throughout. So that's going to be a big set of criteria for me. And the last two is just from a listening standpoint. There are no skips on these records, in my opinion, and just a little audiophile fun. To me, they're headphone essentials in a lot of cases. So that was kind of my criteria picking out the 10 records for the next two episodes. And I could have picked 150, but I just went first 10 that came to mind. I grabbed off the shelf and put aside in a pile and ready to talk about all of them. How about you?
Yeah, I think you said it all. It's funny when you said no skips before, I thought you meant the record doesn't skip.
My records don't skip. My records don't skip.
Yeah, the record cannot skip. But no, that makes total sense, right? These are going to be full albums. Set it and forget it, right? You drop the needle on it and just go and flip it over once, and you're good to go. I agree. And it's funny, I wasn't thinking of it from the same angle that you did, but as it turns out, my criteria completely matches yours in the sense that and I won't get into it. I'll go into it as we go through this. But point being is that those things do bleed into each other. So it's everything you said is right on for me as well.
Absolutely. So let's get rolling. So this is so last Thursday night we did a Surface Noise B-side, and after the stream, we were just kind of winding down, talking more shop, talking more music, and one of our collective favorite artists came up, which is probably a lot of people's one of their favorite artists, if not their favorite artist in a lot of senses. And the guy that came up was Jimi Hendrix. And you go through Jimmy's catalog, you have Are You Experienced, Axis Bold as Love, so many great records. But the one record that Jason and I immediately bonded over unanimously as being our favorite Jimi Hendrix album is Hendrix, Band of Gypsies, live at the Fillmore East. This was a New Year's Eve show that is incredible for a lot of different reasons. But to me, when I got introduced to this record after knowing a little bit about Jimmy, this went right to the top of my pile as far as his greatest accomplishment. And this is not too long before he passed away. It's a little bit different than his previous material. He was like in this experimental phase and really funky, really blues driven rock, very socially driven rock. And it's an important record for me in so many ways. So it's a record that a lot of my friends and I bonded over Jimi Hendrix. I mean, that's why I didn't really reveal this to you, Jason. That's why it was so interesting when you said it, because I'm like, man, so many of my good friends and I, like, that's the Hendrix record we go to. It's got this element of just psychedelic power to it. The concert video that complements the album is amazing. When it first got reissued on DVD, it was in black and white, and it was like just these three monsters of music just shredding through. And it's an album I've gone through all the, over and over again. I revisit it so much. And before the show, Jason's actually playing it while we're kind of talking, getting ready for the show. And when I played a lot of hoop, a lot of basketball, I told Jason, this is one of my pregame albums. If I'm on the bus or pregame, like, hit play on Band of Gypsies. And that was it for me. The other great thing I love about this album is I think my favorite guitar riff of all time is the opening track, Who Knows, right? The way Jimmy just comes in and he kind of just hovers through the music glides through the sound, and there's like the psychedelic experimentation. Machine Gun sounds like a machine gun. And there's the B side of the record, which is like just all about kind of like social change and kind of bringing it together. Kind of wraps up the 60s in a strange way, right? And unfortunately, you know, for Jimmy, he met his demise shortly after, and it was just painful that, you know, this was kind of the last of the golden material that was coming out for him. But this also helped me respect guitar players. You know, when you get something live, 3 people in a band, and Jimmy's just going off and expressing himself, you start to realize what the instrument can do. And it also really made me gravitate towards live music. So as I got into more and more bands, a lot of the bands that I love, they got to be great live. And, you know, this record kind of showed that to me. So massive influence. And like I said, great on headphones, not only vinyl, but also on headphones.
I mean, I like what you said. There's just so much for a trio, and those power trios, really, I think that got coined during that era, you know, like Cream and the Hendrix and stuff like that are just, man, dude, it's just so, the sum is so much more than the parts. Yeah. And, you know what, even just Jimmy on his own is so much more than the part. Like you mentioned, we were talking about it, the Star Spangled Banner, right? At Woodstock, which was just unbelievable. And it sounds like a symphony, you know, it's just amazing what he was able to accomplish in a trio, you know?
Yeah, I think that Star Spangled Banner, I've said, I brought this up to people, I kind of get a crooked eye, but I think that's the greatest piece of American art ever. You know, he's taking the Star Spangled Banner at a really important event in American culture, and he politicized it in his own way and added some imagery with the sounds he was creating in that performance. And it's just epic. And that's what Jimmy did. And that's what Jimmy does on this album. And I probably got turned on to that, like after I got into Hendrix. Like when I saw Bandit Gypsies in live, I'm like, oh, I never really heard of this. Like I always kind of put it off. And I regret not getting into it sooner, because it just blew my lid off when I discovered it.
Yeah. I was very fortunate in the sense that my parents were very into music, and they liked good music. You know, my dad was always influencing me. In fact, a lot of the stuff I'm going to show today, you know, and Hendrix was one of those, and he loved it. You know, he taught me everything that I know, or up to a point. And I grew out of that and kind of discovered my own stuff. But yeah, another thing about this record specifically is that, you know, when 2000 was coming, the year 2000, right, that New Year's Eve, I knew I was going to have to listen to something. And I was trying to figure out, what do you listen to, you know, New Year's Eve? You could pick the Grateful Dead, because obviously lots of New Year's Eve content there. Mm-hmm. I went to the Jimi Hendrix, man. And so it was literally one of those deals where we're up and, you know, I don't know what we were doing, probably playing video games or whatever. And like the clock's getting toward midnight, and like right at midnight, I dropped the needle on this and, you know, go right into the intro and listen to the whole thing. And so it was kind of a fun way to bring in the new millennium, really, right? But so cool that it's a New Year's Eve show and stuff. And yeah, I mean, what else can you say? It's one of those things where, you know, people argue, is it Are You Experienced the best record? Is Electric Ladyland the best record? There's been times where I've said Axis is the most well-rounded studio album that he did. But at the end of the day, man, when I just want to listen, I go to Band of Gypsies, because you get to hear him in his element, man. At that time, we didn't get, and I wasn't around in 1969, but I mean, for the people that were, and those early days before stuff just started coming out on CD and all of that stuff, like this was how we heard him live, you know? And it was just, I don't know, it was just such a treat to hear him. And like you were saying, it's just, there's this vibe where you said they got to be great live, and so many, I say so many, but the ones that are great live, you know, the Grateful Dead when at the top of their game, Zappa I would put up there, you know, and Hendrix too, where it's a whole different ball game, man. So yeah, if you're someone that's just listened to the studio stuff, which you should, it's fantastic, right? But you haven't got into this yet, you got to hear Band of Gypsies, man. It's top notch from front to back, for all the reasons you said, Chris, and for all the ones I can think of. And not to wrap it up in a cheesy bow, but man, I'm just thankful that, you know, my dad introduced that to me when I was young, and I could just get a flavor for that stuff, so that, you know, and to the point where 24 years ago, almost 25 years ago, I was dropping the needle on that sucker, you know, whatever you want to call it, 2000 AD Eve, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, it's cool. Like even with, I've played that on New Year's Eve, and then also the other. Actually, it's coming up, and I'll probably do this Wednesday night. The Last Waltz always is a Thanksgiving Eve play for me. The band, you know, concert, which took place on Thanksgiving Eve. It's always becomes like part of your ritual, and it's cool to kind of tie that past show or experience to the actual date that's happening now. So I love that you do that. That's really cool. And you're right. You could have chose some great Grateful Dead shows like the Winterland show, a couple of others on New Year's Eve.
It was hard not to, you know, it's just one of those deals where, you know, whatever's in your stream, your brain patterns in that moment is the thing that you go to. And for me, it was just Jimmy, man. I've had many times in my life where I would go through a massive Jimmy phase. And I loved it when like the CDs were just coming out and stuff. I say just coming out, but a lot of his stuff was getting they were pulling together stuff out of the vault, right? And other live shows and stuff. Seemed like, I don't know, it's probably late 90s by when I got to it. It seemed like they were coming out with box sets and stuff. And I was just in heaven, dude, because it was like, what new Jimmy I haven't heard? And for the average person, we didn't really get that until like, you know, when CDs came around and stuff. I don't think, at least I didn't.
Well, that was a big deal with the Hendrix situation. I'm not like a scholar on this, but I think at Woodstock 94, I think his sister or somebody in his family came out and was like really pissed off. Everybody was bootlegging his stuff. And then like starting in 96, 97, you saw the Experience Hendrix brand kind of pop up, like reissuing the stuff from the original master tapes, all these compilations that came out. I don't know if you remember, it was probably like 99, 2000, that 6-disc purple box set came out, the Jimi Hendrix Experience. That was insane.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the first one I remember, I think. Yeah. And there was like a BBC Sessions or something that came out too.
BBC Sessions came out. Yeah.
I snagged those. Yeah. That was right in my wheelhouse, man.
Yeah. And just to think he died at 27, like it feels like he has decades of work, you know, that he put out. But
I know.
But Jimmy, man, Jimmy,
he's getting an early nod. I love it, man. For records we're thankful for. All right, we better move on, man. We could spend all day on Jimmy. We might have to one day, but not today.
It's not a bad idea.
You want to jump into your next one?
Well, this is what I did. So I had my daughter. Right. I picked 10 records, and she assigned a number to them. So they're all random in this crate next to me. So what I'd like you to do is pick a number between 1 to 10, whatever number album that is. I'll pull it and I'll just go into it. So give me a number between 1 and 10.
Let's go 7.
Lucky number 7. Let's see what this is. Oh, okay. I thought this would be a leftover, but I'll talk about it, and my friends will get a good chuckle out of this one. So the first record I'm thankful for in tonight's episode is the Dave Matthews Band, Before These Crowded Streets.
There we go.
For hell a lot of reasons. So those that know me know that this is one of my 2 favorite bands of all time. It's a band I've seen live 90 times and counting. Been seeing them since...
Is that a real number, 90? Or is that just a facetious number?
No, I'm at 90.
Oh my God, dude. That's crazy.
So it kind of ties into this. I was in 8th grade when this CD came out. And they were huge. They were huge in the 90s. And I felt like it was kind of a poppy thing, but I feel like their first 2 albums are phenomenal. And I don't listen to a lot of their studio stuff either. But this record just struck a chord with me in so many ways. They get this reputation of like this happy hippie band, but when you get behind the melodies and the sound of the music, Dave has some of the darkest lyrics ever known to man. And, you know, this record really kind of highlights that. What's up, Mom? This record kind of highlights that. So this was something that made me appreciate a couple of things. Number one, obviously that they were a great live band, but number 2, like it showed their maturity, how they kind of blew up fast their first 2 records, and after a couple of years kind of put this record together. instrumentally, it's just really, really, really diverse. You have strings, classical music, jazz licks, and stuff like that. But this album really like catapulted me into a whole nother appreciation for this band. I think a year after that album came out, my mom actually took me and my friends to my first show at Giant Stadium, and then from there is pretty much tradition. Seeing them a few times a year, going on multiple shows over the years. And it's one of these things where I kind of describe it as like the way my daughter feels about Taylor Swift and how she's going to grow up with her and like see her grow and mature. That's the kind of way I feel about the Dave Matthews Band. They're always going to be a constant. They're always going to be a steady. They're a close second to another band that I bring up all the time, which I promise I won't bring up tonight. You know who they are. But it's got pop hits on the album, and it just brings me back to a place where it's like that was one of the first albums that I was like front to back, like I'm kind of coming into my own, finding my own music, stuff that's from my generation, because a lot of stuff I listen to is not. And it's just great to go back to. And it's like one of the only studio albums by theirs that I actually go back to and choose to listen to front to back, because it's just a complete picture of how good they are.
Wow. That's wild, dude. Well, I was going to ask you about the band that shall not be named. Have you seen them more times than you've seen Dave Matthews?
No, I haven't. I haven't. For those keeping score at home, we're talking about Fish. I haven't seen them more because I was a little too young to really get into Fish, but then Fish took so many breaks for a long period of time, which that's probably why I also saw Dave Matthews Band so much, because it wasn't like the Grateful Dead. I like the Grateful Dead a lot. I don't call myself a Deadhead because I never saw Jerry, but it had that reverence for my generation to a certain extent, where it's like every time you go, it's most likely going to be a different set list. It's going to be a different show. You don't know who's going to show up or what's going to happen. Not to the extent that Jerry and the boys did it, but it kind of felt like you were honoring something that came before you. And I felt like the band felt that way about them, even though they might not have been, big fans of that music or directly influenced by it. But I kind of carrying on that culture of like the grassroots, build an empire from playing live a lot and making, acceptable studio records going through. So that's my first pick. You picked a good one to start.
That's a good one, dude. And another blind spot for me, man. You're gonna, as we get into this series, I can see Chris is gonna try to do some voodoo on me so that I can start adding some of these records to my collection. But I can't believe 90 times, dude. That's just a crazy number.
Yeah. And that doesn't count once seeing him acoustic and then twice seeing a side project that he did. So I've seen him a little bit more than that, but
92 times. All right. Well, a lot, there's going to be kind of a theme, I think, for me on these. And it kind of goes back to my dad, and he really influenced me heavily on what I listened to, especially early on. And I would just ask him questions constantly. I was so curious about music and loved it so much. It was like, what's this? Who are you listening to here? What was that band that we used to listen to when I was like 5, and I try to like sing some lyrics from, and he'd go, oh yeah, that's blah, 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 or whatever. Or yeah, I'd show interest in something. He'd be like, okay, you got to get these 2 records. And that's what the story is with these ones. And so I'm showing 2 here because it's really kind of like one record for me. My dad was like, look, man, you got to get some Stones in the collection. And this is where you got to start. You got to start with Aftermath and Out of Our Heads.
Nice. Right, yeah.
And it is kind of a twofer, I think, in a way. We got one record that came out, which I think the first time that the Stones wrote their own material and got a hit from it. And then we got one where they started to add a little bit more to it. This is the first time we ever got Satisfaction right here, Out of Our Heads. And then we get stuff like, I can't see here, Paint It Black. And a lot of their early stuff, most people will know, is very bluesy, and they redo a lot of blues tunes on these too. And of course, in their own Stones way, right? But this is these records are really sort of those first ones where they're coming into their own in their early days. After like I said, they were I almost think people have said they were sort of a blues cover band early on. Hard to disagree with that.
Right.
But this is when they're kind of coming out of that, and they're kind of figuring out what they're going to do, at least as they get through the 60s, and then the 70s was a whole nother ball game, right? But if I was going to pick two Stones albums from the 60s, would have to be these. If I was going to pick two Stones albums, I would have to start here as well. I heard these early enough that they're very nostalgic for me. They're very much like they become sort of part of my DNA at this point, you know. And some of the later stuff, as great as it is and as much as I love it, this stuff I can't give it an honest critique because it's so subjective. It's so part of my DNA. It came so early into my life. But man, dude, just some great stuff on here. We got, Painted Black, like I said. We got Under My Thumb. We got Satisfaction. But then a lot of the cool bluesy stuff. Like I'm Going Home. Oh, Play with Fire is on here. Spider and the Fly. Just fantastic blues stuff. But what comes through on these records more than anything is just how great Mick Jagger is, man, and how great he was. And he was in those early days. Now, I always say that Start Me Up is like the greatest rock and roll tune of all time. It has, if you listen to the quality of Mick's voice on that song, it is second to none. It's like he's gargling rocks. It's so rock and roll. It's so kick-ass. But man, it starts here for me. So yeah, these are early influences. Again, my dad turned me on to a lot of stuff. We're going to get into some of it, but I'm very thankful for these two records because not only are they fantastic, but again, they kind of got my imagination going and thinking in terms of the 60s. And that just kind of branched out and went to a lot of other great stuff from the 60s. So yeah, the Stones, Out of Our Heads, Aftermath. Fantastic.
So we talk a lot about our parents' influence. I think a difference between maybe your parents and my parents is your parents seem to be like collectors and like had records, and my parents had records too. In fact, I have their records. But my parents always had music on in the house. So I actually learned to love and hate things based upon what they played oftentimes. Your experience with like those Stones records, did your dad have those? And like, were you able to like put them on, or like, do you remember him playing those albums at all? Or was it just like when you got to a point where you're like, Dad, I need the Stones, he was like, here's the starter pack, like run with it? Like, what was that experience like?
Well, it's funny, and I do want to touch on that, but you said something too, was like my parents collectors. I always had records, but I never thought of it as collecting. You know what I mean? Like it was always just, we listen, and I don't mean to, but I do call that out because it was like, it wasn't as if I look at collecting more of like, and I know people even back then that collected and they had the shelves and everything's lined up and everything's alphabetical and in sleeves and all this. To me, that's sort of like you start getting into collecting. With them, it was like, it was just leaning here, it was leaning there. You bring the jacket and read it in the bedroom and it would go, it's like there was no sense of like collecting, if that makes sense. But they both always had lots of music and I got it from them. Anyway, I don't want to beat a dead horse about that. But yes, those two records, not so much. The first time I ever remember hearing the Stones from a record, and yes, they would let me play it, and I was probably like 5 or 6 years old, was the 7-inch 45 of Brown Sugar. And on the B-side was Bitch. Right. And so, and I only remember that because I have memories of 42 years ago or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, I just remember that. And I remember loving that stuff so much as a little kid, dancing around and learning the words and stuff. And of course, when it came to the B-side and learning that that's a bad word, I'm holding it and I'm like, isn't that a bad word? They're like, yeah, kind of, they couldn't really be clear. Well, there is the female dog version and this and that. So for about 5 minutes, I probably said it like 100 times, just walking around the house until they were like totally annoyed. Like, no. Okay, that is a bad word. You are not allowed to say that anymore.
Unless Mick says it. Let's at least say it with Mick.
Yeah. At least mix it in with Mick. Yeah. So
a funny thing about you bringing up those records, I love the Stones. I have a lot of their stuff. My favorite Stones song is Play with Fire. I love that song.
Oh yeah.
If I had to pick like Desert Island playlist and I could pick one Rolling Stones song, that's the one, man.
Yeah.
For me at least.
That's a great one, dude. The Stones, baby. All right, what do you got next? Oh, I got to pick a number.
You already picked 7, so I need a different number.
All right, I got 7. I'm kind of keeping track here. So, all right, we got 7. Let's go 3.
Uh-oh. Okay.
More fire.
It's fire for me and my generation for sure. Actually, this is something you could probably relate to as well. This is my Sergeant Pepper's.
All right.
This is my Sergeant
settle
Pepper's.
in.
This is I was not old enough to be there when this came out, but I found it a few years later and it changed my life. And that's Tribe Called Quest Low End Theory.
Oh man, dude. Such a great album.
So my mom's watching. I got to be careful. This actually wasn't a really dirty hip hop record at all. In fact, there's a story behind why it wasn't. But grew up in New York, outside of the city, an hour out in the suburbs. Hip hop was just part of the culture, and we had hip hop FM radio. It was very popular, and this was coming on MTV. I was listening to a Tribe Called Quest like in their later years, but went back and found this album. And this album is the actual reason, I think I talked about this on our jazz series. This is the reason why I got into jazz, because I started picking up on the samples of this stuff. And, you know, I was like, what are they stealing from that I need to know about? So I call this my Sergeant Pepper's because to me, like, I had never heard anything like it before. Obviously hip hop existed, but not in this capacity. Front to back, sonically, it's just majestic. Like, there's so many different styles of music on here. The lyrics are fun. The lyrics are catchy. There's cultural references, but those cultural references like don't get outdated. Like even the slang and stuff like that. Maybe it's because I'm getting older. I feel that way, but to me, this just brings me back to like, you know, when you put on headphones as a kid and it just like everything else just gets locked out and all you can hear is the music. Like this was one of those first albums that did that for me. They sampled Grant Green on this, Funkadelic, Minnie Riperton, Bobby Bird, Grover Washington, Heat Wave. There's so many things that I got exposed to because of this album. And this also became, as time went on, like a lot of my friends you'd play it for them or give them a copy of it, whatever, on tape or borrow the CD. And like, now that's their favorite album. And now it's
right.
The next person's favorite album. So this just became something that like we always went to. Like we're at a party, Low End Theory goes on. We're in the car on a road trip, Low End Theory goes on. We're going to a concert, Low End Theory goes on. And it was one of those ones where it's like push play right from the start and it just goes. And then the cool thing about it, it's like clean hip hop. I mean, it doesn't have not have curses or anything, but the content is kind of relatable in a lot of ways. And that sort of happened, not fully, but because Ron Carter played on one of the tracks. I don't know if you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he played on Verse from the Abstract, and his big thing was like, I'm not going to get on an album with profanity. Like the main guy, Q-Tip, was like, dude, listen, like, yeah, there's profanity, but we have like a message on this album that we're trying to put forth. So Ron Carter agreed to do it. And, you know, to me, like this opened me up, where I talked about like the criteria of like open me up to new music. Like, yeah, I liked rap and hip hop, but this put me in a specific style that I fell in love with. And I still listen to. I don't listen to a lot of hip hop anymore, but when it comes to Tribe and some of the related bands like De La Soul and some of the Native Tongues or Outkast, guys that were influenced by a Tribe Called Quest, like it just becomes a staple. So this is essential. Everybody should have this album. It's an album I've gifted to people. Like, you need to have this. You need to listen to it. So Tribe Called Quest, Low End Theory. That was a big pick for me when I was a kid.
That's awesome, dude. I think the first time I really became aware of Tribe was probably not until, oh man, late 2000s, something like that. Or I guess, yeah, where I really started kind of wanting to explore some of that stuff I missed out on. Because for me, growing up, you know, in the 70s and 80s, listening to a lot of that early hip hop, like I still love that stuff, but I've been accumulating it recently. Houdini and, you know, and Fat Boys and Egyptian Lover and the stuff that's not even really necessarily considered rap per se, but kind of falls into that hip hop kind of category. And Beastie Boys was huge for me and stuff. But yeah, so I kind of went back and was exploring that stuff, and Tribe was one, and that record was one specifically. And probably also because I was already so into jazz that when I heard that, I was like, holy crap, like this is a very jazzy. I mean, the whole record is jazzy. So that's like,
Yeah.
that was a big plus for me.
Yeah. If it wasn't like, I think I would have gotten to jazz eventually. But that got it to me earlier. I probably would have found Miles or whatever later on in life, or Coltrane. Obviously, it's like just staple stuff. But I didn't start with those guys. It was like Grant Green or like some of that funk soul jazz that they were sampling. Kind of like it's almost an easier entry point. We talked about this when we were going over the jazz series. It's like you could listen to the wrong 2 or 3 jazz records and just be like, nope, this isn't for me.
I'm
So
out.
it's a very
Yeah.
it's a very interesting way to kind of approach it. You have to appeal to kind of a lower common denominator of like pop sensibility or whatever to kind of use it as a Trojan horse to get in. And then once you like it, then it gets weird and you go into the rabbit hole. But yeah,
I love that, dude. Trojan horse is so true.
Forever grateful for A Tribe Called Quest for that.
Well, now you mentioned, I know exactly what tune you're talking about with Ron Carter. I just never knew it was Ron Carter. I figured it was just a sample or something. So that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I'm going to continue with a trend, I guess, here. More stuff from the dad's vault. And I always love to honor him. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple years ago. So it's always great to just kind of reminisce. But this is kind of going a whole different, I say a whole different direction. This is contemporary to the Stones, but very different. Psychedelic. We were Bay Area people in California, and so it was my parents tended to really kind of vibe because they see a lot of those bands live and stuff, you know, at Fillmore or Wonderland or whatever. And so there was an attachment to those Bay Area bands. And this is one, man. And again, I got a twofer here. It's the first 2 Country Joe and the Fish records.
Whoa!
And so we got Feel Like I'm Fixing to Die, and then what's the other one called? Oh, Electric Music for the Mind and Body.
Nice.
And he would tell me stories about how he would just put it on, and it was something you could just like fall asleep to because it's so beautiful, this stuff. It's very sensitive, Country Joe. Like he has a very kind of sensitive voice. And even though he does stuff like the what is it called? The Feel Like I'm Fixing to Die rag or whatever is not, you know, that's more of a hard song, I guess. The Fish Cheer and stuff. But in reality, it's very sensitive. There's a lot of stuff on here, like Sweet Lorraine. I'm going to get these titles wrong. Section 43 is one. Yeah, I should have done a little bit of homework prior to this, but there's just a lot of, especially side 2, that just a lot more sensitive, slow, a lot of organ playing going on here with the vibrato on it and stuff. Really, really cool stuff. Really, really fun stuff. And so, I mean, I would have never known about these guys if my dad hadn't, like, you know, turned me on to it and said, oh, you got to hear this. And oftentimes, you know, we would do a lot of record stores, among other things. We, you know, buy books and stuff, but we'd go to the record store and pick stuff like this up and then just go home and listen to it together, you know. For the first time I'd be hearing it would be with him. I'd buy it for my collection, and he'd be like, why don't you put that Country Joe record on, you know, and stuff. And so we would vibe out together. We did that with the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's. The first time I ever heard that was with him. I just had it in a crate sitting there, and he's all, have you listened to that? I'm like, no. He's like, put that on right now. And we just sat there in silence for however long the record goes on, 35, 40 minutes. And I was just, it was over and my jaw was hanging out. But it was the same thing with these, man. Again, Bay Area band, very late 60s, played at Woodstock, all that kind of thing. But a very different kind of sound, a very 60s sound, but his own thing with Country Joe. So yeah, man, very, again, thankful for these as well. You know, my dad just turned me on to so much great stuff. And this is from his teen years, right? And so he turned me on to a lot of stuff that he vibed on, which, again, I'm just grateful for that in general. The fact that both my parents loved music growing up, they listened to it while I was a kid, but they also exposed me to that stuff that they grew up with. And so consequently, I grew up with it, you know, even though this was before my time. So yeah, Country Joe and the Fish, Feel Like I'm Fixing to Die, Electric Music for the Mind and Body, their first 2 records, beautiful stuff. And so if you like 60s psychedelic kind of stuff, but I feel like on a lighter side, this is not like hardcore stuff. These are great.
That's awesome. I want to ask you a question, but I want to address something in the chat. Sweet Lou said, do new artists release vinyl? And yes. And I think 2 years ago or last year, vinyl sales were the highest around the world since first time since 1986 was like the highest they've been since that time. So yeah, this isn't, Jason and I are digging from stuff that might be outdated, but a lot of these might be new releases if I get to some picks that I have. But yeah, the vinyl's back, and it's back with a vengeance, thankfully. On that Country Joe stuff, I need to know something about him. So it's a Bay Area band, like out of the Haight-Ashbury kind of time. So is it country, or is that just his name, Country Joe? I only know him from like Woodstock. Is it like that Bakersfield country sound more, or like?
I wouldn't say the music is country, except maybe if you really dug deep and academically, maybe. I've never really seen it that way. It's not what people would think of as country at all. It's psychedelic, really.
Okay.
But maybe that goes more to him. I don't know enough about Country Joe to really speak to it, but I imagine it has more to do with just his vibe, personality, maybe with his background or something. But I don't know where he got the Country Joe moniker, honestly. But yeah, it doesn't really reflect in the music. It's not. I mean, the Dead are way more country than say a Country Joe are. I think for most people listening to it wouldn't see it that way.
Yeah, when we put together our playlist, I'll put it when you put a track on there, I'll go right to it. Then you can send me down the Country Joe rabbit hole. That'll be cool.
Cool.
Nice. All right, so give me another number between 1 and 10. You picked 7 and 3 already.
Another number. All right, let's do 10.
Okay. Oh man, this actually has a really cool flow because you're getting my youth picks, which is cool. This is probably top 3 album of this century.
Whoa. Okay.
Came out spring of my senior year in high school. My opinion, top 5 American band ever. This is a band called Wilco, and the album is Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. I love this pick for me because I'm getting into a place now where I'm 17, 18 years old. This came out in like May or April. I'm leaving high school. My music taste is, I don't want to say advanced, but it's atypical. But this is kind of a modern band that's coming in. And I their previous album, Summer Teeth, was really good, but I just knew the singles or whatever. This is, they were kind of called the American Radiohead at one point. They're really not that experimental or psychedelic, but or avant-garde. This is just front to back one of the best records ever recorded. And the crazy part is the label didn't want to release it. They actually got freed from their label and released it independently, and were able to put this out.
What's the title again, Chris?
Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. So Jeff Tweedy's the lead singer of Wilco. Extremely strong lyricist. And you're talking like in the likes of like Dylan, Elvis Costello, Neil Young. Like he's that pedigree of songwriter. Since that record came out, they've been a mainstay in my life. Like to this day, when a new Wilco album comes out, I'm like, Friday's the day. Like, let's get it up streaming. Like, is a record in the mail? Do I have to go get the store and get it? Like, since that album, they've released like 6 or 7, all fantastic. I've seen them live a bunch of times. Killer live show. And actually, a couple of years ago on a Sunday in Harlem, they played the United Palace Theater, and they did this album straight through for the anniversary.
Oh, that's cool.
Amazing experience. And this is an album's album. Like, you'll know what I'm talking about. Like, you put this on and it's obviously no skips, but it's coherent. And then the encore of the show was all the B-sides from the album, which was really cool.
Oh, cool.
If you were a hardcore fan, you kind of picked up on that.
That's
I wound
cool.
up seeing them on New Year's Eve at Madison Square Garden a year or two after this was released. The Flaming Lips opened, and it was this epic like 3-hour show they did. I went with a couple of really good friends, which was really cool. But the other great thing about Wilco is why they mean so much to me is that they obviously created a fanatic out of me, but so many of my good friends love this band, and so many of my good friends have bonded over that album. It's one of these albums where it's like, even if you don't like their whole catalog, like that's the one everybody puts on a pedestal. Yeah. And they're just awesome. They're just hit me at the right time in a kind of a you know, when I'm coming out of high school, it's 2002, and there's not a lot of good music being released. It's mostly pop, and it's that wave breaking of the boy band stuff. It's the commercial country coming into play. So it's like these records that should have been epic for the time, they were to a certain group of people, and then like in hindsight, people celebrate them. But at that time when that dropped, dude, it was like, this is it. This is another one of like my Sergeant Pepper's type situations, or, you know, my Sticky Fingers type thing. Just a phenomenal record overall.
Yeah, dude. I mean, it's almost embarrassing how some of the stuff I've like have blind spots on. Is that cover? It looks like the towers in Chicago. Like, I don't know, remember what they're called, but I've been there. I've seen them.
So
I live on the West Coast, by the way. So saying I've been to Chicago is kind of a big deal.
This is a Chicago band, Chicago through and through. In fact, when they're not doing a tour, but you know, I think every other year they'll do pockets of shows in the springtime. They'll do like theater shows, and it's like 4 in New York, 4 in Chicago. That's it. So like they're really tied to their New York audience and following, but they are a Chicago band. Jeff Tweedy's done a bunch of side projects. This also catapulted me in some of their older stuff. There's bands like Sunvolt that he was in. Marina Towers, right? These guys are just great, and critically acclaimed. Like they're every hipster journalist's, you know, favorite band, but deservingly so. Very accessible to listen to, and really diverse catalog too. So like, Yankee Hotel Foxtrot had a sound that maybe carried over into 1 or 2 other albums, but then they departed from that. They just made a country record 2 years ago. Before that, they were making like a more of I don't want to say electronic, but you know, for the time that they were making the record, it kind of encapsulated some of the pop sounds, even though they're not pop artists. This band, they're gonna go down as one of the 5 best American bands ever. It's for a fact. Like I don't see many bands better than them, and definitely a band everybody should jump into. But yeah, I'm like a kid when their new stuff comes out. I'm like, I can't wait. New Wilco, like let's go. When's it gonna drop? What do I need to know about it? You know.
Woo, strong. All right, man, I gotta check it out, dude. I was gonna do that next. I'm gonna do this next, I think. Here's a record no one's heard of. You know, I think this came out when I was like 12 and changed my life in a lot of ways, at least for a time being, and it did for a lot of people. I am not unusual in saying that. And it's MJ's Thriller. Am I thankful? Yes. I cannot leave this record out because it's really the first time I identified with an artist so strongly. And it was like with Star Wars, we're like, with Star Wars, it was like we had the pajamas, we had the posters, I had the Frisbee, I had the toys, the records, like it was just the watch, it was everything. And it happened again here when I turned 12. And I had the cards and the action figures, a wallpapered room and MJ and all that stuff, the Thriller jacket, the glove. I was MJ, with the Thriller jacket for Halloween that year. I mean, he was just such a huge, influence isn't the right word, but just an icon for me. And I was like the MJ guy at our school. So, and this is why. I mean, I was already listening to like Off the Wall and stuff. I had the cassette tape and loved it and everything. It was groovy and fun. But when this came out, I remember my mom bought me the cassette tape and it was like, I just about cried. I was like, oh my God, because I've been listening to the music on the radio, I've been watching it on MTV. And my butt was on the couch every hour on the hour when Thriller came out, the video, the long extended video that everyone remembers, they would play it every hour on the hour on MTV. So it was like most of their programming. And I don't remember how long that went for, maybe a day, maybe a week, but I remember that. And I was there watching it every time, just soaking up every nuance. And then the making of Thriller came out and you get to see them do the makeup and rehearse the dance and all that stuff. And again, I'm right there watching it. I was so obsessed with MJ during this era. And so, yeah, I mean, how could I not be thankful for this, man? And even the stuff with Paul McCartney, they got Mike and Paul in the back and stuff. And say, the girl is mine. I mean, I just knew every lyric by heart, knew all the dance moves. And just, it was just a huge part of my life when I was like 12, 13 years old. So yeah, I mean, not much more I can say about it. Everybody knows the story, but yeah, man, MJ Thriller, definitely have to be thankful for that, you know, and thankful for my mom for buying me the cassette tape and allowing me to hang up the posters, you know, everywhere and stuff. And yeah, MJ Thriller, man, it's just such a big part of my childhood.
I'm trying to think, like, I don't think there's a release that came out that had the same impact as Thriller had for me. Not even for me, just like the culture, I guess.
Yeah.
So I went through Nirvana and Pearl Jam. I was still a little bit young for that. I went through Eminem. I went through Backstreet Boys and Spice Girls. I sold all those records. I don't really have those anymore. I'm just kidding. I never had
The
those.
Spice Girl.
Yeah, like I just help me
Backstreet
understand.
Boys.
Help me understand. Like you talk about the cultural impact, but like, was the music a departure from something when Off the Wall came out and when Thriller came out? Was it a continuation of something? Was it like radically so good and different simultaneously? Like, what was that like versus what else was coming out at the time?
I mean, a couple of things that I say about it, and I mean, other people could agree my age or and older or not. I don't know. I mean, in a way, I was the perfect age for that. It's like, and I very much compare it to like when Star Wars came out, and I was very young. I'm like 5 years old when Star Wars comes out, but I saw it in the theater. My parents took me and everything, and the way the world kind of shifted when Star Wars came out, it was like, in a way, it was like there was a line in the sand. It was, we had the world before Star Wars, and then we had the world after Star Wars, when just everything was different at that point. And it wasn't just film and soundtracks and everything. It was just the culture. It was everything us kids played with, and the fact that it was everywhere. Like you couldn't get away from it. Like, you know, it was Halloween and everything. Thriller was kind of like that, at least my experience of it. It was like, yeah, we were all vibing to music, and I loved music from a young age and stuff. And we were listening to, I was listening to, you know, early Prince stuff maybe at that time, but it was kind of like early hip hop that I talked about. I think Houdini maybe had a record before that, and maybe I don't know if the Fat Boys came out before that, but it was kind of like that early electronic stuff. I could be mixing that up, but right around that same time. But I think my listening taste at that time would have been like Earth, Wind, and Fire. It would have been like Fleetwood Mac and stuff. Anyway, MJ drops Thriller, and it just changed everything, because I guess a lot of it had to probably do with marketing in the same way that Star Wars did. Like it was kind of, I don't want to say forced on you, but it was everywhere again. It was on MTV every time you turned it on. MJ was on there. Every time you went to the store, the Michael Jackson was on the front of every single magazine cover and stuff. And it did become a real cultural phenomenon. The other thing about the difference with music, I think, back in that time was that we had less options. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have, you know, cell phones and stuff. So we weren't really distracted by other stuff. It was like video games, music, sports, movies. You could count it on one hand. And so when big things would happen, most people would be aware of it, you know, like you know, the Super Bowl or, you know, just big things, big events that happened back then, where now people have so many different options that not everyone's into. Like, I don't want to say everyone was into the same thing, but in a way, I don't know. I think more so than now, you know? So anyway, I don't know. It's a long-winded way of saying, like, for me personally, yeah, like Thriller was a big shift, and it was like my life before it and after it, but also culturally, it was a big thing. Like everyone was aware of it, and everyone was being rocked by it, and things really changed, you know, moving forward from there. So that's what I would say. If it hasn't happened that much, maybe Taylor Swift, or like you said, maybe Nirvana and stuff like that. But even as we go through the decade, it just feels like less and less people are like tuned in to any given thing, because there's just so many different options, I feel like.
What about, I was always curious about this. I just want your opinion on it. Was the fact that Quincy Jones was involved with that production, did that bridge a generation to Michael Jackson in a way? Did it, like, was that, how impactful was that? Was, like, I don't know much about Quincy's chronological timeline. Was he, I know he was Quincy Jones, but was he the pop producer he was before he got to Michael, or was that like a big stepping stone for him? Do you know anything about that?
I mean, a little bit. And I mean, he did Off the Wall too, and they started
Right,
on The
yeah, of
Wiz
course.
working together and stuff. But I mean, when he did Thriller, it became more mainstream, I think. Like here I was a 12-year-old kid hearing the name Quincy Jones, who was
Right.
like a producer, not a musician, not a singer, not a, you know what I mean? And so I think a lot of people became aware of him during that time. That's the first time I ever heard Quincy Jones and for a long time, I only knew him as like the guy that helped Michael make Thriller or whatever. And then, of
Right.
course, you start going back to the lineage and everything, and he goes way back to, I've said it before, in Count Basie's band, playing trumpet, and writing tunes
Yeah.
for Basie and all this different stuff. The theme to Sanford and Son, which I never knew until recently, which is a
Yeah.
show I grew up with. But yeah, I think definitely there was something that was the first time, kind of like when they started doing Rudy Van Gelder's name started to become a household name when they started putting his name on all the CDs when they were reissuing all of
Right.
the jazz CDs and stuff. Quincy became kind of that during that time. For whatever reason, he would start showing his face at the Grammys and stuff. And so yeah, I just think he became more of a. There was more of an awareness around like, oh, at least for me as a young person, like it's not just the band that makes this stuff happen. Oftentimes there's other people involved. And so that was kind of the first time I was aware of that.
Was there an anti-Michael Jackson crowd? Like, I mean, like, what did that record sell? 80 million copies or something
Yeah, something
insane.
insane.
So, like,
Yeah.
was there outside of like maybe like a counterculture punk movement or metal movement or something? And I'm sure even those people probably crossed over because the music was so good. But was you say like everybody was listening to it? I get it. I could picture it. But was there people that were like stop, like enough's enough, like this isn't for me, or was it really just everybody was into it?
I'm sure there was part of the problem with my memory of it is going to be that I was so engrossed in it that I wasn't
Mhm.
very objective about my surroundings.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
I just assumed that, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. Everyone just knows. And of course there were people that weren't into it. I had friends that were like, what I don't want to hear this again. It's like, cause I mean, for me, it was real obsession. Like I could just listen to it over and over and over and over. But yeah, of course, there were people that weren't down with that, and some of the other stuff that was going on. It's like anything popular, right? People are going to be like my parents. My mom was cool with it, but I'm sure my dad was like, that's your thing," So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was also kind of an age thing too, right? I mean, I was just the perfect age for it.
Right. Right place, right time.
Yeah,
It's like being 14 and when the Beatles come, it's the same kind of the same thing. Right.
exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. That was a
All right,
good
what do you
pick,
got?
man.
Thank
All right,
you.
give me a
Yeah.
number.
Oh yeah, I got to give you a number. All right, so we picked 7, 3, and 10. All right, let's do. Trying to pick numbers that. Okay, let's do 5.
All right. Oh, well, okay. I'm just gonna go right to it because this is one of the 10 best albums ever. It's not why I picked it. I have a very specific reason why I picked this, but I'm gonna go Bob Marley's Catch a Fire.
Oh, okay.
Everybody loves Marley, right? Even if you don't like music, you like a Bob Marley tune. Everybody has legend. Everybody likes the greatest hits. Hearing this album when I got exposed to it, probably sometime in high school, blew my mind because it was Marley that I never imagined existed. This political, social conscious from a rebellious, almost rebellious standpoint, anti the man Marley came out. And this did so many things for me because I jokingly, when I talk about Marley, I say like there's Club Med Marley and then there's real Bob Marley. And the Club
Hardcore,
Med
yeah.
stuff is fine, like vacation stuff is fine, but like this to me is one of the greatest records ever. And really I think Marley's best album besides Exodus, maybe. I mean, Exodus had a certain cultural appeal to it, but this album blew my mind. It's just raw. There's 2 versions of it. It's hard to get the Jamaican version on vinyl. You can stream the Jamaican version, which is just stripped down, just the band, and then like the record that most people know is the American or UK version, which has added instrumentation and guitar effects to it. But right from the opening track, Concrete Jungle, the just the bass line and the drum lick that comes in on this record is ridiculous, and the lyrical content's amazing. This is so important to me because it did two things on a very specific level for drumming. It made me appreciate how unique drummers can be and how they can impact sound. And I'd encourage everybody to go listen to Carlton Barrett, or Carly Barrett, as they called him. He had a very short career, mostly with Marley. Totally influential reggae drummer, just a sick approach to how he dealt with the music. But the other thing this did for me is this opened my mind to roots reggae beyond Bob Marley. Everybody seems to be, oh, I like reggae. Oh, do you like Bob Marley? Yeah, of course you like Bob Marley. But if you throw Marley aside, there's dozens of other artists in this time period that you can kind of get into. And this kind of opened my mind to the idea that reggae was more than just like this happy vibe, island getaway type of scene. Like there's a real political driving force, social conscious force to the music from a lyrical standpoint and from, just a rhythmic standpoint. And if I had to pick one genre of music of everything I listen to, you can only take one genre with you. It's like roots reggae from like the 60s into the early 80s would be appeals to everybody. Yeah. And if it wasn't for Marley's Catch a Fire, I don't know if I would have gotten into the rest of his catalog as deep as I did. I don't know if I would have gotten into bands like Black Uru. I don't know if I would have gotten into bands like Steel Pulse, like all these great reggae bands that just have a totally hardcore root sound and roots mentality, and the lyrics are spiritual but rebellious at the same time. The sound is mesmerizing. I mean, you go see a good reggae show, it's like there's nothing like it. I mean, just I'm sure in the Bay Area you might have experienced some of that growing up or heard the vibes from it. But that Marley Catch a Fire record is like a desert island disc for me. And it's not the Marley that everybody goes to, although they should, I think. I know Exodus is great and whatnot, but Marley Catch a Fire, hugely impactful record that I'm thankful for.
That's awesome, dude. I obviously I'm one of those guys too. Like I've heard of Marley and listened to Marley and stuff like that, but I don't go very deep in reggae. I was more of a ska guy. I was more of a rude boy and always listening to the Specials and the Selector and English Beat and all that kind of stuff at that time, which is kind of like sped up reggae, right?
Yeah.
But so yeah, I don't know. Have you ever listened to any of that stuff? Did you ever get into ska at all? Or
oh yeah. So it's funny because so two things. Like first off, the Wailers started off as a ska band, and that's what's so great about this Catch a Fire record. This was like a strict departure from what Bob was doing when he was younger. It was like, if you listen to the singles and the stuff he did with Lee Scratch Perry up until this point, he just drops off a cliff into like roots reggae. But yeah, I worked backwards into ska because when I was a kid, especially like in like late grade school, high school into college, there was like this pop punk movement, and there was a lot of ska bands. Like for a long time, I felt like the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones was like real ska, and like I get it, or like Real Big Fish. I don't remember those guys. But then when you start getting into reggae and you start kind of tracing the roots back, you get into the Scatolites, right? You hear about the Specials, you hear about all these bands that just release singles on the Trojan label or something like that. And they have all these great box sets and compilations you can get of ska reggae music. And that's the real deal, right? Probably more of what you're talking about. So yeah, listen to all of that. I mean, it's a necessary thing. And I always make a joke like reggae is what happened when the ska drummer got stoned, right? They just had to slow it down a little bit. Like, but it's true. Like it's hard to ignore that influence and how it evolved into the roots reggae sound. And then even when ska was still existing in the late 70s into the 80s, you heard the reggae sound come into ska more often. So the two worlds definitely do blend. That's just my take on it. I'm sure there's people that can go deeper on that, but that's just my exposure and how I kind of view it.
Well, and I know there's a hardcore origins of ska that goes back and stuff like that. For me, it's going to be more the pop stuff that I would hear growing up as a teenager and stuff, in like the 80s. You know, even like in stuff that would be very marginally ska. Like, I mean, English beat, I
English
guess, kind
beat.
of fits into that category, but they're
Yeah.
extremely poppy, right? And I mean, just I love them. I love them. They're so great. But the Specials, I think, is one that was kind of that later, late 70s, kind of hanging on to that ska. Maybe it changed a little bit coming out of the punk movement or something. But yeah, so I was really kind of into that stuff. I remember one time I was in college and I was I was wearing a Special shirt or something, and this girl runs up to me and she's like, because you know, very few of us kind of walking around with like ska shirts and stuff, and I had like a Rudy sticker on my car and everything, and she's like, "Oh, you like ska?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Oh, that's so cool," and everything, and I'm like, "But I'm super shy." I'm like, "Okay." And then
Yeah.
one day she just runs up to me. She's like, "Let's go bowling." I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Let's go bowling." I'm like, "I don't bowl. What are you talking about?" So I had this blind spot with this band called Let's Go
Let's
Bowling.
go bowling. Yeah.
I totally lost all credibility with her in that moment, you know, and she's like, "No, they're coming. They're playing. Do you want to go?" I'm just like, "Oh God." So anyway, but one of those memories, man. But yeah, dude, I mean, I was heavily into the English beat and the Specials mostly. I was into, I'm trying to think of it,
A lot of that two
Madness.
tone. Yeah. Madness. A lot of that two
Yeah,
tone stuff is really good. Really
very
good.
poppy, very like polished. It's not like that ska from old, but I love that stuff. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. I think like the reggae influence is deep, and it's really easy to kind of get compilations of stuff based upon
Yeah,
record label or like style of reggae, and you can kind of it's like jazz. You can figure out, am I a funk? Do I like fusion? Do I like hard bop? Reggae is kind of broken out the same way. Do I like dub? Do I like ska? Do I like roots? Do I like lovers rock? Do I like dance hall? You can find your way, and it's encouraging because a lot of that reggae style, a lot of those reggae styles I don't care about too much. I mean, like some of it's really good, but I'm really more of like that roots music. That's why Catch a Fire was so special. But it's cool to see Marley's career unfold too, because if you go back to his earlier recordings, there was like a doo-wop ska sound, and all his work with Lee Scratch Perry, and with Tosh was in the original Wailers, and Tosh left and did his own thing. Now Tosh's style is a whole nother rabbit hole to go down, and
right.
the later Marley records, leading up to Exodus and stuff like that, is a whole different movement. So Marley's one of those artists, kind of like Marley's kind of like Nirvana to me, or Pink Floyd actually is a better example. Marley's kind of like Pink Floyd. It's like everybody knows Dark Side of the Moon, but they don't really take a chance to listen to metal.
Right.
And Dark Side of the Moon is amazing, but you're missing out something that's better than 99% of the albums ever released, because it's not Dark Side of the Moon. You haven't gotten there yet, or Animals,
Right.
whatever the case may be. I feel Marley's like that. It's like this novelty thing, but if you really dig deep, it's some of the most mind-blowing music you'll ever hear. So
It reminds me, I did see Ziggy Marley perform. He was really popular right around, I guess, the early 90s, right around 1990, I guess. I saw him with, he opened up for the B-52s.
nice.
So I saw Ziggy and the B-52s. So that was a cool little show. All right. Well, I'll jump into another one. Again, like I said, by the way, we are doing another show next Monday. There is a holiday coming, so we're going to pre-record it, but it's going to be the leftovers from this show. So today we're going to cut it off after we each show our 5, but this is going to continue next Monday. And that one will have a lot of my more contemporary stuff. And well, I say contemporary, more stuff I discovered growing up, I guess. Today is going to be a lot of influences from my parents and stuff. And I tell the story a bunch of times, how much I was into like big band music growing up and just loved that sound. And my dad would play old like 78s of stuff, the Ink Spots, someone's rocking my Dreamboat or whatever. And I got to asking them like, what is this? What is that? What is this sound? And I just remember asking like, what is that sound where it's like, and I didn't know how to express like what a muted trumpet sound was or whatever, but it's a small band. It's like, the light drums and quiet. And I was really kind of describing like Miles stuff that I had heard, but didn't know how to attach it. And he goes, well, go check out 2 bands or 2 guys. Go look for Miles Davis and Thelonious Monk. And so I go off to hop on BART or whatever and go to Berkeley. in my neck of the woods and snagged 2 records, and these are the 2 records. And so it's Miles Davis and the Modern Jazz Giants right there, which is really a compilation, but it has Thelonious on it and Red Garland. Milt Jackson, Coltrane is on here. And again, this stuff is so early for me. My discovery of jazz proper, I guess, kind of breaking away from that big band stuff, that it's hard for me to be objective. I just love it. It's like one of my favorite jazz albums. And the other one I picked up that day was this one, Monk on Prestige. They're both on Prestige. They were probably both OJCs when I picked them up, because it would have been like in the late 80s, I guess. And this one's got Sonny Rollins. It's phenomenal. And so these are 2 records I'm very thankful for because of my jazz sort of development and kind of breaking free from the Count Basies and the Glenn Millers and all that stuff, and getting more into this kind of stuff, which would be, this isn't hard bop. That's stuff I would come to later, but this is just going to be kind of that more early kind of 50s jazz, kind of cool jazz. And I guess for both, you'd really call them that. But yeah, so just phenomenal stuff. I mean, I learned who Thelonious Monk was. I learned who Miles was. And there was just the beginning of a love affair that goes to this day, still exploring these guys and finding new music by them. And that all started 30 some odd years ago. So yeah, man, very thankful. Again, thanks, Dad. I appreciate you. Thank you for knowing so much about music and being patient with me and answering all my questions, because it led me down this path. So, as for records, I mean, look, they're both fantastic. I mean, you got Sonny Rollins and Thelonious Monk right there. It's a great album, but there's a million places you could go to enter into Monk. This is just where I entered in on Monk. And then we got, basically what was, these came out on 10-inch prior to this. I still think of this as an album. It's really, it's a compilation only in the sense that it was released on 10-inch records prior. But again, a lot of people will go somewhere else when they start with Miles. This is just where I started. I love these. I can recommend them. I think they're great, and they'll always have a special place in my heart, because it's really kind of the ground zero for me when it came to really getting into jazz. So
I'm with you on those compilations. Like I looking at the Marley record I did, I'm trying to remember what else I did so far. I mean, even the Hendrix stuff, like those weren't the first albums I listened to by those guys, or not even first albums, the first exposure. I was a kid. I had greatest hits CDs, I had greatest hits tapes, or best ofs, and like those compilations are really important to music entry. I'd be hard pressed to find a person who wasn't, maybe 12 in 1963, like started buying albums their whole life. Like, I'm sorry, it didn't work that way. Everybody had to start somewhere. So I never discredit, like, if I go back and think of my memory, like it was greatest hits CDs, or like I borrowed CDs from my uncle, especially my Uncle Dave, and like dub side A was this greatest hits and side B was this greatest hits on a 90-minute Maxell tape. And those compilations serve a really strong purpose, especially like you're not hearing Miles Davis on the radio. You're only hearing it because you hear your dad play it, and then he's giving you that recommendation, and you can't have all that he has. So you need that one record to kind of be your guiding light going forward. That stuff's important.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, also, I can't speak for everybody. I spent my whole life in the Bay Area for like my first 40 years. And then I finally branched out from there. But we were lucky to have like college radio shows that would play jazz. We had local channels that would play jazz music, and my dad would play it usually late at night. And I'd get to hear that stuff. I've said it before. There's a guy named Jazz Bo Collins that would come on famously, and Count Basie's song was the theme song to his show, and he would play jazz throughout the night and stuff. So I did kind of pick up stuff like that. But again, I was probably the only kid my age doing that. You're
preaching to the choir, man. You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah,
Trust me. My friend's like, "You're weird. What is this? What are you listening to?" And then like fast forward a few years later, like, "Oh, this is actually pretty cool." I'm like, "Oh, now you think it's cool?"
Now it's cool.
Now it's cool, right? So, all right, I guess I got one more left in me. I want to keep going, but we got to have another episode.
Yeah. All right, let's do it. Well, I got to pick another number, huh? All right, let's go. Let's go number 2.
Oh, so glad you chose this. Okay. 10 or 11 years old. I guess it's like 94, 95. I got to say this. My parents had a very, what I consider to be like a modest record collection. It was a lot of Elvis, Neil Diamond, these radio compilations that I have. If those familiar with New York, WCBS FM was like this gold mine of a radio station, played like oldies and pop hits like of previous generations. What else did they have in a record collection? Some stuff I'm a little too embarrassed to mention. I don't want to embarrass them.
We'll save that for another episode.
Yeah, they influence a lot of what I like, but they also taught me what I hate too. So it wasn't like my mom and dad had a turntable. It's like records went on, CDs came out, like they had their little CD collection, but they always had the radio on. So I was always exposed to everything from like the Temptations all the way to like the Partridge Family, like just a wide range of stuff. The Beatles were on all the time on this radio station and all the other stations that they played. And then something happened in the 90s, like when I was a kid, this Beatles anthology came out.
Oh,
ABC.
Yeah, I remember that, dude. I love that.
I want to take credit for this, but I don't know if I really can, because a lot of my friends' parents had really good taste in music too. But something caught on where like all of a sudden, like all the kids in school love the Beatles, and I love the Beatles too. So it was from that anthology, and like some of the first Beatles stuff I owned were like those anthologies. They were expensive. CD, double CD or triple CD back in the day was like nothing that was easy to get for a lot of people. But I'd like save my money, or like birthdays, or like aunts and uncles would buy them for me and stuff like that. It was really cool. So I remember vividly being really inspired and like wanting to know more about like Strawberry Fields, I Am the Walrus, like all the psychedelic stuff. Like I could see why I am the way I am now in a lot of ways, and what I like. And even with some of those earlier records that I showed. So the Beatles record that I'm most grateful for, this might be an unpopular pick, but for me, it's very, very important. And that's going to be Magical Mystery Tour.
Oh, nice.
So
love that record.
Yeah. This was the first true Beatles album that I owned. I had it on cassette. I remember hearing the anthology CDs and hearing, like I said, Walrus, Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane. I was like, whatever has that on it, I'm going to go find. So I remember there's a Camelot Music in the mall near me, which I wound up working at for years later on. And I wound up finding like the greatest hits, but that was like a 4-tape set or whatever. And then I found Magical Mystery Tour. I had those 3 songs. So I was like, all right, Magical Mystery Tour it is. So what got me kind of catapulted into that late Beatles stuff that I became like a fanatic about was also these other tracks on here, like Blue Jay Way, Flying. Like I didn't know the Beatles did instrumentals. I'm sure it was a little George Martin influence, but Flying, and they were just like,
is it like Baby You're a Rich Man on there too?
Baby You're a Rich Man is on there. I love
that one,
which is like, it's like, I didn't know that the Beatles, were able to do this. The cool thing is, I'm going to talk about my dad for a minute. I don't know if he watches this ever, but like my dad loved music, but I was like a nerd about music. Like my parents always had music on, but I was like, I would ask them like, oh, what about this? And they're like, I don't know. It's just good. Like, what do you want me to tell you? And I'm like, I don't think they were getting that. Like, what do you know about it? They had their memories from seeing concerts and stuff or shows, but they were never not like me. I'm a little obsessive, as you know. I'll never forget this. I'm sitting in my room. I had like a Walkman with like headphones on, and the Magical Mystery tape tour, the Magical Mystery Tour tape is on this like nightstand or something. My dad just pops his head in my room and he looks down. He's like, is that the Beatles? I'm like, yeah. He's like, is that Magical Mystery Tour? I was like, yeah. He's like, I had that on 8-track. And it was like this moment where I was like, all right, there's a couple of things going on here. Like either my dad thinks I smoke weed now already, or we're bonding over the fact that we both had this album, and he thinks it's weird that I have it, and like I have it on tape and he had it on 8-track. But it was like one of those things. I got like this subconscious nod of approval from my dad, and it was about the Beatles, which I never thought would happen because we didn't have like all the Beatles records in my house. Like they came on the radio, Love Me Do, Let It Be. Yeah, these are great songs. But yeah, this, between the anthology and like just having this first, and I played the shit out of this over and over and over again until I don't know. The next one I probably got was like Revolver or something. I just went, what's the next one I can get? What's the next one I can afford? What's the next one I have birthday money to spend on? But it all started with Magical Mystery Tour. I know it's a pretty atypical place to start, but it's just because of the hits. And then I was really grateful I found some of those oddity tracks, like some of those deeper cuts, I guess, for the Beatles that aren't so deep. But at the time I was like, I didn't know they could do this. So this is a really, really important record in like my musical fandom and development, Magical Mystery Tour.
Yeah, the Beatles have kind of a complicated discography, right? I mean, whether you go UK versus US pressings, or whether you go even Magical Mystery Tour, which I had the double 7-inch of that recently, came through my hands, and I sold it on Whatnot, but it was like an interesting way to have it, which was, I think, was not an uncommon way to have that. And I don't know that much about it. I don't want to say it came out first and then the LP came out, but
it was an EP first. Yeah, it was an EP first.
Yeah, and so I had this double 7-inch was really cool. I don't even know if it included every song, and I think you're right. Like if I had to guess, they did the LP later, and they probably attached some other stuff to it. Of course, during that time, they were always leaving off like the singles, just like with the Stones, and those would become just singles. But then in the US, we would get the single on the album, and they would leave off some other songs. But I love that record. And part of it is that the Beatles were always in the background of my life growing up. For everyone, right? You always hear it, like it's always in the background. Someone's listening. It comes on the radio, whatever. But I was never like, I could never put together and even tell you like, oh, this is a Beatles song. Until like around the mid 90s. And suddenly like I took this, and I met somebody that was really into the Beatles. And I think they were just coming out with stuff on like maybe the singles record just came, or the number one hits or whatever that one was called. I think that collection that you showed also.
Yeah, the anthology.
This
was on ABC.
Yeah, and so I started watching those, and I just started getting super infatuated with the Beatles at that time. So it took me kind of into my whatever that was, I guess mid-20s or maybe even mid-20s. To really kind of discover the Beatles properly. And then it was all bets are off, man. I had to hear every single song. I had all the albums and all that stuff. And it was so great. It was kind of like, that was my sort of discovery of the Beatles.
I feel like for us, because we didn't grow up with it, I've said this to people where, for us not being in that at that time, like you don't find the Beatles find you.
Yeah, right.
Eventually, like even if you're not a big music fan, like there's going to be something where, like I know two people specifically that don't listen to music but have every Beatles CD or tape or whatever.
Right.
That's what they have, right? That's what they're into, and I think that's what's really interesting about that band. And like just like you, it was, yeah, I know who they are, and my maybe we belt "Hey Jude" at a barbecue. Or like everybody, but there was no one that was like a fanatic that could tell me about them. So like this anthology series on ABC was a big deal. And going back to what you were saying, I know this is the 90s, but this was like not 8 o'clock on whatever night, like everybody was watching it.
Right.
And that really helped me be like, oh, these guys are really special.
Yeah.
And then it was cool to kind of see my friends and I, who are also to this day, a lot of them are huge music heads, and we're all into different stuff. And I catch up with them once in a while, but like we were all kind of in it together, like rediscovering it like 30 years after it happened because of that documentary and stuff. It's not my favorite Beatles album, but it's the one I'm most thankful for because of that. It catapulted me into everything, the whole catalog. And it also kind of dialed in what type of Beatles I like, that era, that second half, that psychedelic, experimental, not clean cut Beatles. That's my favorite Beatles. I like the early stuff. It's fun. There's a lot of really great songs, but that, White Album, Sgt. Pepper's, Revolver, Rubber Soul, Magical Mystery Tour, Let It Be.
There's definitely a line in the sand when it comes to the Beatles. And that's the thing my dad would always say too. Like, I want to hold your hand Beatles. He would always say that, and stuff, but I do, but for him, yeah, it was like Rubber Soul, Revolver. It kind of starts there. And then anything after that, I'm good with. Anything before that, I'm not good with, which I actually really appreciate that middle area. Like Help, I really like.
Hard Day's Night, Help. Yeah.
Hard Day's Night's very good. Yeah. So I do actually appreciate some of that. I mean, I can enjoy it all for what it is, but yeah, I'm definitely more Rubber Soul, Revolver, Magical Mystery Tour, Sergeant Pepper's. That's kind of my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Oh,
Makes
and of
sense.
course, Abbey Road. I mean, I think
Abbey Road is right.
God, that's a great record, man.
We should do a show. I don't know if we could do this soon, but we should do like greatest A sides and B sides of albums. I would argue the Abbey Road B side is the greatest B side of any album ever recorded.
So good. That John hated so bad. John Lennon. Yeah. Well, I got one more, I think. And I could have done a twofer for this one. I almost want to reach behind me and grab it, but I'll just say it. So now I got to throw my mom some props. And when my parents were divorced, obviously, I lived with my mom after that. And so a kid growing up with her from like 7, 8, 9, 10 years old and stuff, listened to what she listened to. And she was very different from my dad. My dad kind of went off and got into like blues and stuff. And so I'd get to hear John Lee Hooker and Muddy Waters and guys when I went to his house and Cream and all that. But then at my house, it was Fleetwood Mac and this band, Journey. And this is Infinity. And between this and Escape, the other one I should have pulled out, they were on the turntable constantly. And I had my Atari 2600, the first Atari home game console that was out, playing Missile Command and Space Invaders. And this was the background music to that time for me. And it's a special time. I mean, I was like 9 years old into 10 years old. And it's funny, I've said this before. I think we should do a show about it. But it's like, I have more memories about being 9 than like my entire adult life combined. It's just so much fun, cool stuff happened. I had so many experiences. And yeah, a lot of them were just small experiences. But I have a flood of nostalgia from being that age and stuff. And just, from playing with kids to listening to music to playing video games to whatever, and it was such a fun time for me. And this was the backdrop. And right around this time that like Tron came out and Journey was on the Tron soundtrack. And that was cool. My mom, I guess I didn't get to go. She went and saw Journey live. This would have been like 80, 81. And she took my cousin instead of me, who was a few years older than me. I guess I was too young, she thought, or whatever. But I don't know. It was just Journey was everywhere and stuff. And I know a lot of people feel some kind of way about this. Another Bay Area band, by the way. And, some people are not into Journey. Hear people say like Journey and like they compare them to Led Zeppelin or something. It's like, it's not that. But man, Neil Schon shreds on the guitar to this day. I still think he's one of the greatest guitar players of all time. A super imaginative, creative, composer on the guitar. Like if you listen to the guitar parts on here and on Escape, they're phenomenal. They're second to none. I'll put them up against anything. And then of course, Steve Perry on vocals. I take those two guys a special relationship, just like I take, Eddie Van Halen and David Lee Roth as a special pairing of voice and guitar and just outdoing each other constantly. Steve Perry and Neil Schon were the same way. I appreciate it so much. So yes, I am thankful to my mother in this case for playing Journey all the time, man. And so I got to appreciate it, when this stuff was relatively new. And it was really a backdrop to my life for a year or so. And so to this day, when I want to remember that stuff, I just go to these records and put them on, and it's a time machine. It transports me right back to 1981, 1980. I love it. It's part of my DNA, Journey.
I like it, man. And you know what? There's something to be said about that. There's stuff like I listened to as a kid that I don't think I would have gotten into as a later period, or maybe I would have gotten into but not appreciated as much. And if anybody ever gives you shit about Journey, you just have to remind them that Neil Schon was in Santana's first 3 albums, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Split off. So this is also kind of, I might be overstepping my bounds here, but your mom and dad seem to have different musical paths, and it's kind of symbolic that I feel like your dad might have really been into Santana and your mom was into Journey, and that's kind of
yeah, that's true, split, dude. You know that's very true. I could have showed the first Santana album here tonight because of my dad.
Right.
And which I don't think Neil Sean's on there or anything, but I mean, it's like he was really into that. And then
Yeah.
there's and then my dad or my mom moved on to Journey. So and Wyoming Dave talking about Tron and having to see it in the theater. My brother, I did get to see it in the theater, and it was one of those deals where, just like I said, the same thing with like Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Tron was one of those, E.T. When you leave the theater and you get home, it was like I had to replay it in my head. And when it was Tron, I was running around the backyard on my light cycle and all, an imaginary light cycle and stuff, man, and throwing frisbees, thinking I was, throwing the discs or whatever. But yeah, Tron, great movie. It might look outdated to some people now, especially if you've only seen the remake and stuff. I mean, but it was, again, it's right there with Journey in terms of my love for it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ted. I think Neil Sean was on the third record, and the one after the third record. I can see the cover. I can't remember the name. I'm sure Wyoming.
Yeah, isn't it? I think they're both called 3 and 4 or something like that, aren't they? And then there's Baraxis. Is it Baraxis?
Abraxas,
I don't know if he's on that. I don't know which ones he's on, honestly.
He's on 3, whatever 3 is.
I think it's Santana 3, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'll have to look it up. Somewhere in the middle there, they're just numbered. Now I got to look it up. Abraxas, Santana 3.
Right. So he's on. Oh yeah. So he's on Santana 3, and then he's on. I can never say this one. Caravanserai.
Oh right,
those
right,
two,
right.
and then he left, only to return in 2016. On Santana 4. I forgot that they did that. I never listened to that album. I have a lot of the early Santana stuff, but I guess they reunited most of the original band for that. I forgot that happened.
I'm gonna have to check that out.
Damn.
That first Santana album, dude. Oh,
yeah.
I could listen to that on repeat.
Just that Woodstock performance too. It's just insane. You know the story with that. But Carlos. I've seen Carlos 3 times. I haven't seen him in a long time. For some reason, I just got lucky. Every time I've seen him, I've been within like 10 rows. I saw him like back-to-back nights where we were like 3rd row and 2nd row by chance. And then I saw him the last time I saw him, I was like maybe like 15th row dead center. And just like face melting all night. These guys are amazing. Yeah, it's incredible.
Such a special player, yeah.
Bay
Area guy too.
Also a guy that thinks very highly of Fish and has sat in with Fish and sat in with Trey.
See, he's trying to work on me. He's chipping away. I'm
kidding. Well, man, this was great. We got that was the first 5 of our picks for episode 1. We're gonna have episode 2 of the leftovers post Thanksgiving hangover for everybody next Monday night. I'm excited about the next 5 because there's some stuff I was hoping that you would pick randomly, but I'll tell you what, the leftovers is going to be really strong when I look at the rest of my stack here.
Very nice. Yeah, I think I got some strong ones too as we come down the home stretch. And I love that idea too, man, the leftovers thing. As soon as you said it, I think both of our eyes lit up like, wait, leftovers. So yeah, look for the leftovers next Monday. That'll be pre-recorded, but we'll still drop it at the same time and everything, same channel, all that good stuff. Guys, thank you, guys and gals. We had the Chach family was in the house, man. That was great.
That was cool.
Appreciate you guys. Yeah, thanks Dave for being here. Thanks Chance for being here. Appreciate you guys, man. Yeah, everyone have a great Thanksgiving. Yeah, we're not going to see you until then. So have a great Thanksgiving. And then when like Chris said, when you're having your food hangover next Monday, tune in for the pre-recorded leftovers.
Jason, I'm very grateful for you, man. It's been a wild 2 months linking up and getting to do this out of nowhere. And a happy Thanksgiving, my friend.
Oh, same to you, man. I'm also grateful for you, dude. This has been awesome.
Yep. No doubt.
All right, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.